Hello, ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls. Welcome to another thrilling episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights, where Thomas here, the mad painter from across the pond, and I, the retired sound engineer from good old London town, gather around our favorite armchairs to discuss all things cinematic.
Oh, hello there, dear viewers. It's always a pleasure to have you join us on this journey through time. Film history. Tonight we thought we'd spice things up by diving into the wonderful world of science fiction with the timeless classic Back to the Future Part 2.
I must admit, Tom, I haven't seen this one in a while. Perhaps it's time for a refresher. What do you think, dear viewers?
Well, Timothy, let's dive right in. Now, for those who haven't had the pleasure of witnessing this masterpiece yet, Back to the Future Part 2 picks up where we left off in the first film. Marty McFly and Doc Brown are back from the Wild West of 1885 and land smack dab in the year 2015. And boy, did they nail it with their predictions, didn't they? Flying cars, hoverboard.
They got nothing right, Tom. Not a single thing. I mean, where are the flying cars and those shoes you can ride on? It's just a bunch of nonsense, if you ask me.
Ah, Tim. Always the pessimist. But let's not get too bogged down in that. Back to the plot. So Marty and Doc are back home, and lo and behold, they find themselves face to face with their future selves. Now, here's where things get a bit complicated.
Yes, quite the mess, isn't it? I mean, seeing yourself as an old man is bad enough, but to have two of them running around, that's just plain confusing. And what about those kids they meet, Marty Jr. and his sister? They're even more unbearable than in real life.
Haha, you're right there, Tim. But let's not forget the heart of this film. Saving the future from Biff Tannen's clutches. After a mishap with the DeLorean time machine, Biff steals it and uses it to give himself riches and power in the past. Now, Marty and Doc have to travel back once again. This time to 1955, to prevent Biff from changing the timeline forever.
That does sound, interesting. But I still don't see what all the fuss is about. It's just another time travel movie, isn't it?
Ah, but Tim, you're missing the point. Back to the Future Part 2 is so much more than that. It's a commentary on the nature of fate and free will. An exploration of what happens when we meddle with the past. And it has a very memorable soundtrack, too.
Yeah, I do recall some catchy tunes from my younger days, but back to the plot. So Marty and Doc go back in time again, and, well, let's just say things get a bit messy. But they eventually manage to set everything right, don't they?
That's right, Timothy. And you know what? It all comes down to the power of friendship and family. Marty learns that no matter how crazy life may seem or how far back in time he might travel, his loved ones will always be there for him. Now, isn't that a touching message?
Well, I suppose so. But tell me, Tom, what was the reason behind the multiple trips to 1955? Couldn't they have just gone back once and fixed everything themselves? Why did they need to go twice?
You're always asking the tough questions, Timothy. Well, my dear viewers, it all boils down to a simple matter of time travel physics. You see, in order for the changes made by Marty and Doc to take effect in their original timeline, they needed to create a closed loop by going back to 1955 twice. Otherwise, they would have simply returned to an alternate reality where Biff's actions had already been undone. So there you go.
Still seems like a bit of a stretch to me.
But I suppose it makes for good entertainment. So overall, what did you think of Back to the Future Part 2, Tom?
Well, Timothy, as much as I love this film and its intricate plot twists, there are a few moments where the pacing feels off. And some of the special effects haven't aged quite as well as others. But overall, it's still an enjoyable watch that manages to tug at your heartstrings while keeping you on the edge of your seat.
I suppose you have a point there, Tom. So, what's your rating for Back to the Future Part 2 on a scale from 1 to 10 stars?
Well, Timothy, Considering all factors involved, I give it an 8 out of 10 stars. It's not perfect, but it's still a classic in my book. How about you? What's your verdict on this time-traveling adventure?
Well, Tom, I must say that I'm a bit more skeptical about this whole time-traveling adventure thing. It's just too much for my British sensibilities, you know. But since you're so keen on it, let's discuss something interesting about the making of Back to the Future Part 2. Did you know that the DeLorean car used in the film was actually modified quite a bit for its time-traveling duties?
Oh, Tim, you know I love talking about movie cars. So what specifically did they do to the DeLorean? DeLorean?
Well, according to my extensive research on the internet, they fitted it with an advanced time travel computer system and a plutonium reactor to power the whole thing. But I'm more interested in how they created the futuristic cityscapes of 2015 in the film. Can you shed some light on that, Tom?
Of course, my curious Brit friend. The futuristic scenes were actually filmed in and around the real-life locations of Los Angeles and Pasadena, California. But they added plenty of digital effects to give it a more futuristic look. For example, they digitally removed the famous San Gabriel Mountains behind downtown Los Angeles to create a more open and expansive cityscape.
And what about that hoverboard thingy?
I mean, we still don't have those in 2023.
How did they make it look so convincing back in the 80s?
Tim, you know I love talking about special effects. The hoverboards were actually just skateboards, with special effects rigs attached to them. The hovering effect was achieved by shooting the board from below using a crane and then flipping the shot upside down during post-production. As for the flying cars, those were actually scale models that were filmed in front of a green screen and later digitally added into the scenes.
Well, I must admit, they did an impressive job with the special effects, considering the limited technology available at the time. But still, I'm more of a Mad Max kind of guy myself. Don't you agree, Tom?
Oh, Timothy, you know I can never resist a good apocalypse, and Mad Max is definitely one of my favorites in that genre. But let's get back to the Future Part 2 for now. So what did you think about the visual effects in this film?
Well, as much as I enjoyed the flying cars and hoverboards in this movie, I must admit that some of the special effects haven't aged quite well. For instance, the way they depicted the future cityscape with all those holographic ads and floating cars. It just doesn't quite have that same wow factor as it did back in 1989 when the film first came out.
I understand your concerns, Timothy, but keep in mind that this was made before computers had the processing power to create truly realistic CG effect. They had to rely on practical effects and models for much of the film's visuals. And honestly, I think they did a commendable job given the limitations of the time.
Well, I suppose you're right about that. But what about the acting in this film? How do you feel about Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd's performances as Marty and Doc Brown, respectively?
Oh, Tim, you know how much I adore these two. They have such great chemistry together. And their performances really bring life to these characters. And let's not forget the always fantastic Leah Thompson as Lorraine Baines McFly and Crispin Glover as Marty McFly Jr. They both do a fantastic job in their roles, too.
I suppose you're right, Tom. But what about the villain of the film? What did you think of Thomas F. Wilson's portrayal of Biff Tannen?
Well, Timothy, while I can appreciate the effort put into his characterization and makeup, I must admit that Wilson's performance doesn't quite match up to that of Fox and Lloyd. He sometimes comes across as a bit over-the-top and campy, which takes away from the film's overall seriousness at times.
I see what you mean there. But enough about the acting and special effects. Let's move on to something more interesting. Tell me, Tom, do you remember that scene where Marty McFly goes back in time to prevent his parents from ever meeting? And how he almost accidentally gets his mom killed by a falling mannequin head?
Oh my goodness, Timothy. That was one tense moment for sure. But I must admit, it does raise some interesting questions about the nature of fate and free will. If Marty had not intervened and his parents never met, would he have been born at all? Or would another version of him take his place in the timeline? It's a mind bender for sure.
Well said, Tom. But let's not get too lost in deep philosophical thoughts here. We still have plenty of film left to discuss. So what's next on our agenda for Back to the Future Part 2?
Oh yes, there's so much more to unpack in this masterpiece. Next up, we could talk about how they filmed those action sequences with the DeLorean flying through time and space. It must have been quite the feat of cinematography and editing.
Well, then let's dive right into it, shall we? How did they film all those thrilling scenes where Marty McFly zips back and forth between different eras in the DeLorean time machine?
Oh, Timothy, you know I love me some good action sequences. Now, let's talk about how they filmed those thrilling scenes where Marty McFly zips back and forth between different eras in the DeLorean time machine. It must have been quite a feat of cinematography and editing.
Indeed it was, Tom. They had to use a combination of practical effects, miniature models, and key enhancements to create the illusion of the DeLorean flying through time and space. For example, in the opening scene where Marty is chasing down a future Biff on his skateboard, they actually filmed stuntman Johnny Rutherford racing a real DeLorean car at high speeds, while CG effects were later added to make it look like he was flying.
I remember watching behind-the-scenes footage of the making of Back to the Future Part. Second, and being blown away by the sheer amount of work that went into those scenes. It's a testament to director Robert Zemeckis and his incredible vision for the franchise.
Indeed it is, Tom. Now let's shift our attention back to the actors themselves. Michael J. Fox, who portrayed Marty McFly, has become synonymous with the role, donning the signature plate jacket and sneakers.
What do you think about his performance in this installment?
I must say, Timothy, that Michael J. Fox is absolutely fantastic as Marty McFly. His charm and wit shine through every scene, making it impossible not to root for him. He effortlessly switches between being a concerned son, a love-struck teenager, and an unlikely hero, all while navigating the complexities of the time-traveling plot.
And what about Christopher Lloyd's performance as Doc Brown? His eccentricity and scientific genius are essential to anchoring the film's science fiction elements.
Christopher Lloyd is simply brilliant as Doc Brown. He brings a sense of wonder and excitement to every scene he's in. Whether he's explaining time travel theory or building a hoverboard from scratch. His chemistry with Michael J. Fox is palpable, and their bantering dialogues are a highlight of the film.
And let's not forget about Leah Thompson as Lorraine Baines McFly and Crispin Glover as Marty McFly Jr., who both do an excellent job in their respective roles. They help ground the story by adding layers of depth to the McFly family dynamics, making us care even more about the consequences of Marty's actions.
Absolutely, Tim. The entire cast and crew truly knock it out of the park with Back to the Future Part 2. It's a timeless classic that continues to resonate with audiences even decades later.
Well, said Tom. And speaking of timeless classics, have you heard about this new film called Back to the Future? Apparently, it's got some interesting plot twists and turns.
Oh, you mean the movie that inspired a whole franchise?
Yes, that's the one I was referring to. It's quite an interesting film, Tom, and it seems to have left a lasting impact on the science fiction genre. In fact, you could say it had a significant influence on many subsequent movies and TV shows.
Oh, really? Can you give me some examples of these films or series that were influenced by Back to the Future Part 2?
Well, one obvious example would be the Back to the Future franchise itself. The whole trilogy is heavily inspired by this film, especially in terms of its time travel plot lines and gadgets like the hoverboard.
Of course, Tim. But I meant other films or shows were directly influenced by Back to the Future Part 2.
Oh, sorry for the misunderstanding, Tom. Well, there's Back to the Future, the game by Telltale Games, which is an adventure game series based on the film franchise. It features similar time travel mechanics and even some characters from the movies.
Oh, I remember playing that. It was quite fun, wasn't it?
Indeed it was, Tom. But there are also more modern examples of shows that have borrowed elements from Back to the Future Part 2. For instance, did you ever watch Back to the Future, DeLorean Time Machine?
No, I don't think so. What is it about?
Well, Tom, we've discussed quite a bit about this film, haven't we? I'm afraid my hat is firmly planted in the camp that finds Back to the Future Part 2 to be an overhyped piece of cinema. But then again, as you know, I'm not exactly a fan of science fiction.
Ah, but Timmy, you're missing out on so much. This film is a true masterpiece, and its impact on the genre will be felt for generations to come. It's got action, humor, romance, and a story that keeps you guessing until the very end. Plus, who can resist the charm of Marty McFly and the wisdom of Doc Brown?
I suppose not everyone shares my love of period dramas and classic literature, Tom. But seriously, folks, we hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Back to the Future Part 2. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like the video if you found this discussion informative or even remotely entertaining. We'll see you next time for another thrilling episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights.